Oropher was once the king of the elves of Mirkwood, before he was succeeded by his son called Thranduil. His story started all the way back in the First Age as an elf in the realm of Doriath, and many tragic and sorrowful events would shape his character and lead him to becoming the king of Mirkwood. Hey guys, it's Carl here, and in today's episode we'll be exploring the story of Oropher, the father of Thranduil, and the first Sindarin King of Mirkwood. So Oropher's early life is enshrouded in mystery, though we do know that he was one of the Sindar elves that lived in the realm of Doriath under the rule of King Thingol. Though this kingdom was at peace for hundreds of years, this would change suddenly towards the end of the First Age after the death of its king, and Doriath would be attacked and sacked twice in the span of 3 years. The first attack took place in the year 503 of the First Age, when the elves of Doriath faced a fierce army of dwarfs from the kingdom of Nogrod. These dwarfs were unstoppable, and though the elves fought valiantly, they were no match for them, and many of their people would fall in this battle. With their victory secured, the dwarfs ransacked and plundered the elven homes and treasuries, though this wasn't the end of Doriath, for the elves that managed to survive this onslaught gathered under the rule of King Dior, who was Thingol's grandson, and they slowly arose from the darkness and worked on restoring Doriath to its former glory. This period of peace and restoration would only last for 3 years, however, for when the sons of Feanor learnt that one of their father's Silmarils was being kept in Doriath, they gathered a large force of Noldor elves and attacked this kingdom. Once again, the elves of Doriath were powerless to stop their enemies, and many of their people, including their king, were massacred at the hands of their fellow elves. Yet some refugees from Doriath managed to flee this onslaught, including Dior's daughter named Elwing, who carried the Silmaril, and together they settled near the mouths of the river Sirion. Considering his history, I also think that Oropher was amongst them. Now the sons of Feanor had sworn a terrible oath to recover their father's Silmarils at any cost, and all the terrible deeds they had committed so far would not stop them from fulfilling it. And so they gathered their forces once again and launched an attack upon the survivors of Doriath, killing many of what remained of its people. Those that survived this third kinslaying lost all hope of ever restoring their old home of Doriath, and so they joined the people of Gil-Galad, the High King of the Noldor, and for a time they lived with him upon the island of Balar. Now the first Dark Lord called Morgoth was utterly defeated in the War of Wrath, and this battle was so terrible that the vast majority of Beleriand was destroyed and sank beneath the waves, apart from a small piece of land called Linden, and many of the surviving elves went to live there. Since Morgoth was defeated, the Valar summoned the elves once more to travel to the Undying Lands, though some of them, such as Oropher, refused these summons, for they preferred to remain in Middle-earth. Now Oropher was also reluctant to remain with his fellow Sindar elves under the rule of the Noldor, and so he set off with a handful of his people, including his son Thranduil, around the year 750 of the Second Age, and together they crossed the Blue Mountains and reached the forest of Greenwood the Great, which would one day be known as Mirkwood. Oropher's desire to move away from the Noldor elves and the rule of Gil-Galad, their High King, was clearly influenced by the suffering inflicted upon his people at the hands of the sons of Feanor, since they too were Noldor elves. When they reached Greenwood the Great, they found that these woods were already inhabited by Sylvan elves or wood elves, and these elves were more primitive than their Sindarin kinsmen. Yet this was exactly what Oropher had wanted, for he desired to return to a simple elven life, a more primitive one, before the elves had been disturbed by the Valar. And so Oropher and his people merged with these Sylvan elves, and he became their king. He took up a Sylvan name and adopted their language, and under his rule the elves of Greenwood isolated themselves, for they didn't want to meddle or take part in the wars or affairs of the Noldor or any of the free people. Now at first these elves settled upon the hill of Amon Lunk in southern Greenwood, and for a while they were at peace, though eventually rumors would reach their lands of the rising power of Sauron, and they filled Oropher with fear for the safety of his people. And so Oropher led his people northwards 3 times, before they settled in the western valleys of the mountains of Mirkwood. It is believed that the threat of Sauron wasn't the only reason why Oropher chose to migrate northwards, for he also wanted to be free from the growing power and influence of the dwarfs of Moria, and because he resented Celeborn and Galadriel's arrival into the lands of Lothlorien. I believe the grudge he bore towards the Noldor might have played a part in this, since Galadriel was a Noldor elf, though this didn't stop his people from dealing and communicating with the elves of Lothlorien. Now over the years, Sauron's power kept growing, and despite Oropher's desire to isolate his people from the rest of the world, he had the wisdom to foresee that they would never truly have peace and safety unless Sauron was overcome. And so, when the forces of the West started to gather a great army in preparation for the Battle of the Last Alliance, Oropher decided to join their forces, and he assembled a great army of Sylvan elves, and he was joined by some elves from Lothlorien, led by their king called Amdir. Now even though the Sylvan elves were a valiant, tough people, their armor and weaponry were of much poorer quality compared to those of Gil-Galad's army, and Oropher decided that the Sylvan elves would act independently under his command, rather than place themselves under the supreme command of Gil-Galad. This act of pride would cause his people to suffer many unnecessary casualties, and it might have even caused his own death. For during their first assault upon the gates of Mordor, Oropher chose to rush forward at the head of his bravest warriors, before Gil-Galad had given the order to advance, and he was killed in this battle. 2/3 of his Sylvan army would fall in this war, and when Sauron was defeated at last, Oropher's son, called Thranduil, would lead the survivors home, and he became the new king of Greenwood the Great. Anyway friends, this wraps up today's video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested, check out our Facebook, Patreon, Instagram, Discord, Twitter, and some of our affiliate links in the video description. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we'll once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-earth.